Welcome to my first webinar of 2023. It's really delightful to be here with you and to share some ideas that I think are very relevant to everybody's life. I seriously doubt that there is no one who does not at some time, and I don't mean once in 10 years, I mean sometime in a day, have a moment of task paralysis. It's a new term, a relatively new term, and it describes something which we've known for a long time, but it puts an emphasis on it a different way. And I thought that would be worth reviewing, just so we'd all be up to date and know what was going on, and would be dealing with an issue that I think oftentimes slips by us because it doesn't seem so terrible, so huge a problem that it requires that we attend to it or fix it in any possible way. Psychologists came up for a new name for a group of terms we used to call, a group of problems used to call performance anxiety. And we know it as a tendency to freeze up, to go blank, to avoid doing things that we need to do. In other words, we procrastinate. And sometimes we step away from things that we really should be attending to. And we call that task paralysis. This notion of avoiding, of freezing up, is not often applied to people, but it's very much a part of what we used to call the sympathetic nervous system flight or fight response. And it was almost as if people couldn't notice that the first thing we do when we're challenged and frightened or feel threatened or in danger, and we're afraid that things are going to go wrong for us and even get hurt, the first thing we do is we freeze up. We just stop. And we see this in the animal kingdom, of course. Rabbits are famous for that. Squirrels will also do it. If you approach a squirrel in a motor vehicle, a lot of times they'll just freeze up on the road, and then they'll run, typically under the car rather than away from the car, which is unfortunate, of course, for the squirrel and for us who care about squirrels. So this flight or fight response, this sympathetic response, most typically starts with a freeze response. We just stop moving. And typically humans in that time will try to assess their options, the what ifs, and they can do it very fast. If this sort of thing happens, then we'll do that. And it's part of our escape mechanism. The next step, of course, would be to flee if that opportunity is available. And then the third way of dealing with it is to fight. And in our schools these days, we teach children first to hide and be very quiet, to be very still. In other words, to freeze. And then we teach them to get away if possible. And then if things continue in a traumatic way in a school, then the next step is to fight. Learning that in advance helps to enable people. It helps to prepare people, and it helps to enable them to deal with the challenge should it ever arise. And I don't know about the research on that, but I have every reason to believe that it's actually quite helpful, that it helps people to recognize that they're in a dangerous situation and to enable them, to empower them to deal with it in a rational way. Oh, we'll hide. If that doesn't work, we'll run. And if that doesn't work, if we're cornered and being attacked, physically attacked particularly, then we'll fight. Task paralysis can cause us a great deal of pain and inconvenience. The pain is obvious. It's something internal. We feel it. The inconvenience is that we don't get stuff done and we really need to. And so that's very inconvenient. And sometimes that can be very, deleterious in terms of, pardon me, our breathing, our working during the day. I was going to say breathing our way through it, but that we'll get to how we deal with things in a little bit. Lost track. I've been doing that lately. I've been losing track of where I am in a story if I digress into something else. I'm not going to explain why now. Anyway, we have this internal conflict, and that conflict is between our having goals, things we need to do and to accomplish, and our ability to get down to work to achieve those goals. We'll look at this from a different perspective, a different level, if you want to call it that, in a little bit when we start considering how to manage task paralysis. Our fears of failure to attain our goals and to fulfill our duties seem like threats to our happiness and well-being instead of opportunities for self-expression and creativity. And that's actually suggesting one of the mechanisms, which is to take a positive attitude towards challenges and feeling challenged, feeling that inside of us, rather than a negative attitude. When we're challenged, then we have opportunities to find solutions and to work creatively in a challenging context. And that's very exciting and very gratifying when one succeeds in doing that. So these threats, though, feel like threats. They feel bad. They feel dangerous to us. And so we tend to shrink away. And the first thing we tend to do is just to not move, not do anything. Second thing we can do is to run away. And then the third thing is to fight if that becomes necessary. Avoidance is one thing, but if we are able to do a thing, a task, something that needs to be done, then that helps to reinforce the notion that, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And I see now that I can handle that. So we get positive reinforcement from accomplishing our goals, but we get negative reinforcement when we don't accomplish, when we are overwhelmed and suffer from task paralysis and don't get stuff done, feel ashamed of our inability to not accomplish, of our inability to accomplish. We're ashamed of our not accomplishing things. And so it's something that can really disrupt our life, make us feel very badly about ourselves. As I said at the beginning, this happens to everybody at some times, pretty much every day. There's something that we put off doing, we turn away from, or we just stop. We just aren't doing it. Maybe we just sit and think about it for a while. Just because of this internal fear, there's something inside us that feels challenged, that feels threatened, that feels that we're in danger, and we don't pursue that. I was going to say more about the fight or flight response, but I think I've said enough for now, and we'll bring it up later if it seems to need attention. Let's talk about some practical ways of dealing with our paralysis, so we're able to get done what needs to be done when it needs to be done. The first is to deal with, well, the first thing you have to do is to recognize it. And ever since I started working on this webinar, I've been practicing recognizing when I am experiencing some fear and hence some resistance to getting things done. I suffer from some task paralysis. And Typically what I notice is that I get a feeling of not wanting to do it, whatever it is, whatever the task is. I get a feeling of not wanting to do it, and that it's okay if I do something that I will find pleasurable. And the things that I find pleasurable, I've discovered, are things that are truly not threatening. And I like to watch videos on YouTube, and they are truly not threatening. No matter what happens in the video, it makes no difference to me whatsoever. But it does occupy time in a pleasurable way. Um, it's like sitting down and listening to some good music. Good means whatever you like. And it's like you may not be getting your work done, but at least it feels good listening to the music. So the time you're wasting at least feels good. So it's not like it's a bad thing. It's just not a productive thing. So anyway, recognizing when it happens is really important. And then what you do next, there's quite a variety of things. I'm going to list a whole bunch of them for you. Things that you can do to help you get through the paralysis and actually get down and do what needs to be done so that you can really feel good, actually. You go like, oh, look at all the stuff I got done. One of the things you have to do right off the bat is to deal with what are called internal lies. They're the things that are going on inside you that are not true about the story, about the situation. For instance, it's embarrassing. It's impossible. I'm too stupid to do this, or I'm just not capable of doing it. People will make fun of me. People will surely be disappointed with me. These kind of stories that we tell ourselves, they're lies that we tell ourselves, are extremely debilitating and extremely common. And we often don't know that we're saying them to ourselves. We're telling ourselves these lies. And that is a serious problem. So one of the things that you're practicing recognizing that you have a task paralysis taking place or shaping up to take place, and you can feel that tension developing inside you, you can check about which of these things are maybe you're telling yourself about the task or about what's going to happen that probably are not true. So that's an important step. Another thing is to deal with the inner critic's perfectionism. Part of what causes task paralysis is our sense that we have to do whatever it is perfectly, on time, right the first time. And in many situations, that is really unproductive thinking. It's simply not true. When I write a draft, a piece, I'm writing something, an essay or a letter to the editor or something like that. Something that might be either widely seen or read by somebody, and I think it's very important that they think well of me when they read this, and perhaps are even persuaded by what I've written. That they feel that I feel that I can do that, and not tell myself, oh, they're going to be disappointed. They're not going to think highly of me. They won't think well of me. It won't be good enough. And I may even be aware that it's going to take me many drafts, many revisions before I'm satisfied with it. And I found that back in the days when I was in academia, a minimum of 7 revisions, more typically 9, 7, 8, or 9 revisions of anything that was written, and not just by me, sometimes by a team of scientists, would take that many revisions. And that, when those documents got to be long, as they often did, that was a lot of work. That was a great deal of work. And I'm fortunate that at the time, I just came to accept the fact. I think everybody I worked with did, I don't remember hearing people say, oh my God, we got to do another draft. This is terrible. It's like, oh no, we got to do this draft in order to get this document as good as we can possibly get it. But we don't set any limit on us, like once or two or three drafts. So that's dealing with that perfectionist inside is a very important thing. And part of that is recognizing that perfection just really isn't possible. What you reach is an endpoint where you say, enough. Enough. I've done enough. It's good enough. It's okay. It says what I want to say. And realize that if you come back to it later, typically days or weeks later, I don't know if you've had the experience that I've had a few times recently of going back and reading something that I wrote literally years ago and being amazed at it and just having all kinds of, well, I'd say that differently today. And that doesn't sound like it's really correct. Give me 1 second. There we go. So dealing with that perfectionism, allowing for mistakes and the necessary do-overs, using non-violent, which means non-judgmental language. Non-violent language is non-judgmental. And it means not attacking yourself, not being hostile to yourself, not being critical of yourself. How many times a day do you say to yourself, that was stupid, or I'm stupid? Most people, it's more than once a day. If you're out busy in the world. And so, it becomes important to recognize that mistakes will be made, just actual mistakes, and that it won't be perfect. It's just not going to be perfect. Not the first time, probably not the second time. If it's a simple thing like a little message, yes, you'll probably get it right by the second time. And then another thing to try to accomplish, right? We're going to allow for mistakes, use nonviolent, non-judgmental language. So we don't say that was good, that was bad. We can say it was better, which is still judgmental, but at least it's more benign. Or we just say, that was a good effort. It felt like I accomplished something with that. And then, we may have to make a judgment. Oh, it's ready to go. But our judgment about it is not to tear ourselves down, but simply to say that's good enough to represent me. And then the last thing is disidentify with the outcome. Now that's actually what we've been talking about, which is not to be tied up in the perfection of the ending, of the end product, but just we've done the thing and it feels complete. It feels like we've accomplished what we set out to do. But the identification process makes us go, oh, so-and-so, somebody is going to think badly of us, or that's going to meet with a lot of criticism or pushback, or any other thing that creates a negative attitude, a negative feeling about the project. So disidentifying with the outcome. We just do the job. We do it as well as we, by our own internal standards, but we don't get upset if it's not perfect, or if we later find out that, oh, there's some things we could have said differently. Some other practical suggestions for these have all, but they're almost theoretical, except that you really have to do them. But make a list of the tasks and prioritize if your overwhelm is from simply too much to do. Making lists is very helpful, and then prioritizing. Well, I'll do this and this and this first, or I'll do this first and then that, and then the next thing, however you want to do that. But it helps to bring some order to your day, to your schedule. Break a large project where the overwhelm is simply from the enormity of the project. Break it down into, somebody called it, ridiculously small specific tasks that you know can be accomplished successfully. Just make it easy for yourself. Oh, I got all of these things to do, but where shall I start? And you pick a point and you start somewhere. And then you have another small task part of the project, and another one, and another one. And pretty soon you're putting the thing together. And that's a really very simple thing to do, but you got to remember to do it if you have an overwhelmingly large task. Overwhelm is, I didn't talk about that earlier, but it's definitely one of the ways in which task paralysis comes about, is when we look at a thing as overwhelming. Now, there's some specific techniques that you can use that I find very helpful. And I've described them before. I'm going to just touch on them tonight. But if you're interested in any of these techniques, how to do them, or need some help using them highly effectively, then we can have a couple of sessions. So the first of them is emotional freedom technique, sometimes called the tapping technique. And when I use a very simple one. You tap here, side of the eye, lower edge of the cheekbone, lower edge of the head of the collarbone here. That's right there. It was down a little low, right up here. And then just grab the wrist. Grabbing the wrist gets all of these points on the fingers. Some people use like a dozen or more points. Turns out not to be necessary. And so the first thing in EFT, emotional freedom technique, is you define the problem, and we describe it in a specific way. We use the words, always use the words, even though. So even though I'm afraid that I'm not capable of completing this task, or even though I'm sure that some people will criticize me for doing this, or whatever the thing may be, pick it, even though, and then you make it god awful. And I'm going to be utterly humiliated and totally ashamed and despondent. Okay. And then you turn it around. I've been able to do this kind of work before. I'm perfectly competent to handle this project. I'm going to be just fine. So usually you do, it's bad, or this is the thing, even though I have this thing. Now, the reason we say even though is that we're not denying the existence of the feeling. It's even though I have this feeling, even though I believe something negative about myself, really, or that I'm not capable, or that I'm too stupid, or that, they're out to get me, right? Even though the rest of my team is out to get me and doesn't want me to succeed, wants to see me a failure, I can do this on my own. I can fulfill the requirements of the job, and I'll be just fine. And then after you finish that, holding the wrist, then you can take a deep breath and let it out slowly, slowly, slowly. And then it's nice to say a word that conveys your empowerment, like power or freedom. I like the word freedom myself because it means freedom from the binding influence of negative thinking. So that's emotional freedom technique. It's extremely effective. And I like the open-ended kind of technique where you don't have a script. You just, except for the fact that you start here, make it god awful, and then turn it around. 1, 2, 3. I'm really perfectly capable, or something like that. And that works. For me, it works usually once or twice. I just have to do it once or twice and the problem is gone. So I really like using that technique. You can use it anywhere. If you don't want to look like you're crossing yourself or whatever, then You can just do it mentally, have this mental sensation of tapping like that, grabbing the wrist. Okay, another technique which you've heard me use many times is called inner relationship focusing. Focusing is a wonderful way of relating to what's going on in the body. And it's very body oriented and very, very effective, very powerful. It is not an intellectual process. It's a very simple process that takes you deep into the conflict, the actual source of the pain. I said we describe more about how that pain arises. With focusing, you start out by saying something inside me is feeling, and then you describe the feeling. Now, with paralysis, task paralysis, it may simply be something inside me is so frightened that it can't do anything. It's paralyzed. You can just say that. It's so frightened that it's paralyzed. And you just attend inside to what that might be. Now, when we do the technique, we usually start out by sitting quietly with the eyes closed, taking a couple of breaths so that we settle in. And then we just say that something inside me is feeling frightened, and I'm here with it. And when we say that, the feeling that we have is I'm here with it in a supportive, compassionate way. And then we see what comes. And sometimes there's a breath of relief. Oh, you finally paid attention to me. Sometimes it wants more. Sometimes you get a message back, a feeling back. I didn't get that quite right. And you just say it again. Something inside me feels very doubtful. Okay. And you can just say to it, I hear that you're feeling doubtful, and I'm here with you. You can have a little conversation with that part inside. And so by just being with that in a comfortable way, that inner tension, because you're dealing now with the very source of the problem, particularly if you go through that cycle 2 or 3 or 4 times, and you get deeper and deeper into exactly what it is that's bothering you. And indeed, there may be multiple components to that. It may be the internal judgments and the external judgments that you're anticipating, the rejection, the criticism, that says, you're not good, you're not competent. And so it could be internal or external. And so you go through that and can clear that out. For the very big problems, I think we said before, take a step, any step, and get started. Now, that assumes that you're able to get to the point where you can get started. So you may have to do some of these other things first so that you can clear away that resistance, that fear, and get it down to a point where you can take a step, where you can actually do something. Now, another trick, very simple one, is to start with a task. If you have a long list of tasks, or you have you're breaking a big task into numerous small ones, start with something that you like or that's easily accomplished, something you actually know intellectually that you can do, and just go do that. Because when you start with the one with the least resistance surrounding it, then you have the best chance of moving forward. And you go like, oh, that was okay. Let's see what's next. And you go like, no, that's too difficult. Let me try this. And you pick something else and you do that. And then you work your way. And eventually you get momentum built up and you can really, really be working on a thing. Incentivize. Reward yourself for doing something that you perceived as challenging after you do it, not before. This really works, by the way. Supposing you would reward yourself by watching some videos on the computer, on YouTube or something. You basically promise yourself, maybe even set a time. You get 10 minutes to watch something on YouTube if you finish a particular project. And then you go to work on the project, and when it's done, it's not, I mean, we're not necessarily talking about difficult projects, they're just projects that we're resisting, projects that we are paralyzed to undertake. And then we do that, and then we feel it, the dam breaks, so to speak. We're able to get it done. And then we go like, okay, now we can party. So we have 10 minutes to have some fun. Another thing I was reminded of, this is not something I actually do because of my personal circumstances, but one of the things that's going to be very valuable is to delegate or to work in a group, whichever works better for you and depending on the circumstances. But a lot of times we forget, when we have a lot to do, to delegate some of it to other people. And that means trusting them that they're going to do it. So you may have to give them a little pep talk, a little encouragement. I know you can do this. This won't be hard for you. You know, do you feel some resistance? If you feel some resistance, let's look at what that resistance is. You know, if I promise not to criticize you, will you go ahead and do it like that? And then another thing is to remove distractions. And that means all kinds of things. That can mean your cell phone, it can mean your internet mail, just anything else that might distract. If there are things in your environment, I know people that take work. Well, I used to know people that take work home and do it there because they couldn't do it at the office because people kept walking in and interrupting them, and they find that very frustrating. So sometimes you either have to go hide in the office. If you have kids, you may have to go hide from kids if you're at home. And this is one of the things that during the pandemic people found very challenging, was that, you know, the spouse was in another room, the kids may be in the house, everybody was camped out. The adults are trying to keep the kids busy while also trying to get work done, maybe attend a Zoom meeting. It got to be very challenging. And so one had to do the best one could do to deal with distractions. Don't take breaks for snacks, phone calls, etc. They're all distractions. When you really want to get something done, just do it. Do the task and don't do the other things then. You can do the other things later. Now, every once in a while, of course, you know, you go like, oh, I've got to make that phone call before 10 o'clock. So you just make the phone call and get it done with and move on. Come back to your task. So you may have to make some allowances. But anyway, those are some very practical suggestions, as well as some theoretical ones. I like the emotional freedom technique a lot in this kind of situation because we can recognize exactly what our problem is, even though I'm worried that I'm going to look foolish. And I dread that feeling of public ridicule. You know, I'm going to be just fine. I know how to do this task. I have all the tools I need to get it done. I'm going to be successful. Holding the wrist. Take a deep breath, let it out. Say freedom or some other word that it describes positive accomplishment to you. And then see how strong that feeling is. You want to get that feeling down to a low level. So it's very simple to do. So that's a kind of quick overview. And if you need details on those approaches, you know, we can have a session or two or three, depending on what you're working on. If you're working on something that's really big, it may take 3 sessions. And a lot of times you need my help because you're kind of lost in the problem. And I have some insight into how things work as well as just tools and experience with the techniques, so I can help you get through the process very quickly and very effectively. That's what I had for this in our group clearing session. We'll look at each of us will pick a task that we're paralyzed about, and we'll use a set of steps to approach this task to see if we can't clear away that blockage and set up a situation where tomorrow, unless you're far away and you're in a time zone where it's today, you'll get down to work on it and make things better. Just a reminder that for participating in tonight's webinar, that you can get a $25 discount on a 3-session program if you sign up for that program by January 31st, by the end of the month. And then in February, the second Tuesday will be the 14th. I'm going to have to look at that because February 14th is, I think it's Valentine's Day. Anyway, I was planning on the topic of attending to the heart, so maybe that's an appropriate topic. Attending to the heart is the proposed topic for. Anyway, February 14th is the tentative date. I may move it up a week. I'll let you know before very long. Any questions? Somebody was commenting on which hand I use. I use my right hand for tapping because I'm right-handed. I always tap here, side of this. You can cross over, but I find that you get bundled up in yourself. So I tap here, here, here. And then again, I don't use this collarbone because I can't get you on screen here, but my arm gets all tightly bent. So I use this one. It's just more comfortable. So just right here, here's the head of the collarbone, and I just tap on the underside of that. And then one could go either way with the wrists. I tend to go, again, use my right hand to hold my left wrist. And that's fine, that you can do it either way. It's just that I'm tapping here, and then I just reach down and take a hold of my wrist. I have to raise my wrist up so you can see it, but it's just right there. So that's why I do that way. There's no real significance to it. And some people go both hands, and that's perfectly allowable. There's no rules. You can cross like that, do it on the same side. Again, I don't like this because my elbows are very tightly bent. And then you can't grab both wrists. I've not figured out a way to do that. Any other questions? Okay. I have a feeling that I did not break this into 2 recordings. Okay, well, we'll look forward to meeting you all in February. Have a good January, hopefully not too severe weather. We're doing rather mildly so far, which is great. And it's been a pleasure to be with you all.